I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop so I can come down to you? These are the words of Nehemiah as he built the walls fortifying Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, as told in the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. Today we see, just as it was back then, that Jerusalem is the source of heavy conflict in the Middle East, with multiple groups of people vying for control over the ancient city, and global powers weighing in on the conflicts that have been brewing over centuries. Join us as we delve into the mystifying history of Jerusalem and Israel, exploring the ongoing struggles and complexities that have shaped this ancient area for over 2,000 years. Through riveting discussions, we unravel the mysteries surrounding Israel's pivotal role in global affairs, its significance in the Abrahamic faiths, and the intricate web of U.S. foreign policy in the broader Middle East. Get ready to expand your understanding of one of the most misunderstood regions on Earth, here on the Great Work Podcast. Okay, welcome back to Great Work Podcast. Today we have History Revealed. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I think today we want to get into a little bit different than just Israel-Palestine, and we kind of want to focus on a couple things. I really want to talk about propaganda and war, but I want to start with a conversation we were just kind of starting to have, which is like people don't understand history at all in the United States, or I think you said the UK.
Yeah, it seems to be a particularly modern phenomenon in that young people, sort of that includes us, just have no concept of their own country's history in the UK or the US. And what they do know is a sort of bastardized version of it where their country is only just a sinner, is just one devil who's committed a long list of evils. So in the UK, it's all Britain did was have an empire and have a slave trade, but under that empire was evil. Whereas in America was racist. America had slavery. It did this, that, and the other to Native Americans. And if they know anything about World War II, they'll know that America puts Japanese Americans in internment camps and America dropped the atomic bomb. That's it.
I even don't think people understand about the internment camps.
Yeah, they don't. They haven't got a clue.
Yeah, no. So I was saying, like, in the United States, we stopped teaching at the year 19. And I don't know why that is, because you would think the more recent history is more important. And I guess I don't know from a historical sense how much people would have known about history, probably familial history and like learning from the Bible, which, you know, that causes an uproar when people talk about that as history. But like, it's really a shame that we have such an access to understanding, like, not only the generals of history, but you can learn such in-depth things about history from any country's perspective in 2024, and people choose not to. And that's why I'm glad like your channel exists, because you go through all the history in like an easy to digest way.
Yeah, it's a great irony, I think, of modern times that the more access to information we have, the less we seem to know. If you sort of go back several generations, it was the way people communicated knowledge was so much different. It was much more direct, sort of from the horse's mouth type stuff. Of course, less of the population was literate. Now the entire population is literate. But like we just mentioned, that resources at our disposal, so much of us know so little.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of, when you say it was passed down like oral tradition, oral history, a lot of like the stories in the Bible, like especially Genesis and stuff, people talk about whether or not they're historically accurate. But what I think is interesting is most biblical scholars, this is like what my background is in, believe that they were told as these kind of like fantasy stories to make them entertaining, so people would keep talking about them. And I'm really dumbing that down. And like, isn't it funny that we've come kind of full circle to now like history channels like yours do very well, kind of being entertaining again instead of just in the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly now it's sort of underestimated. And I think even professional historians don't understand just how much of people's knowledge about history, about the world, comes from entertainment in one form or another. And that far more people will interact with a form of entertainment than they will an official source. For most people, it just does not happen. So whether that's a film about a historical event or a television series about it, that will become the basis of their knowledge, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. I mean, one of those entertaining things. If you haven't watched it, and if the people listening haven't watched on Paramount Plus, 1983 and 19, those are like the Yellowstone. Have you ever seen Yellowstone?
No, I've seen 19.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
So was it that or was it 1920? I don't remember what it, or no, it would have been 19.
the First World War film.
No.
Oh, we're
Oh,
talking
so,
about something else then.
um, what is it? I don't, what is it called? So Yellowstone is like it's the most popular show in the United States right now,
Yeah.
The Ranch. And then there's two prequels, and one is about how the people got to Montana from, I didn't know half of what they talked about in there. I didn't know that most of the people who ventured out west in the United States and like bought land out there or got land for free. I knew that people came from Europe and they had that's how my ancestors came, I think.
Yeah.
So they had a bunch of German people and talking about like none of them spoke English and they all kind of whatever. But then also a lot of the people were people who fought on the side of the Confederacy, and then they were kind of exiled from communities in the South. And so then they ventured out west. I didn't know that until I watched that show. They also talk about how Native Americans were treated, especially in the second one. So highly recommend those to people who want to learn about history from a historical perspective and check out History Revealed.
Yeah, and I'll say, unfortunately, so much of Americans' view of their history with slavery and the slave trade comes from the series Roots, which was an old series, which really laid down the popular imagination of what happened, even though it's really badly historically inaccurate in many places. But that became the common understanding, and that's completely distorted Americans' view of their own country's past for a very long time now.
Oh, I haven't seen that, but
yeah, the main thing they do in that series, which is so damaging, is that they portray Americans as going into Africa and actually stealing African people, which didn't happen. And the other thing is the Africans themselves are portrayed as a sort of naive and innocent to what's going on. So what's going on? These white people are coming and enslaving us. What is all this? The reality, of course, is that the Africans were enslaving other Africans and selling them to Europeans or Americans. And the Africans every tribe knew full well what slavery was because they were almost all engaged in it. And they were all happily attacking each other to capture slaves to sell to Europeans, and then even before the Europeans arrived, they'd still been enslaving each other. But all of that is lost, and you just have this very singular narrative of American bad, African good.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, another thing is I think that people are so scared to talk about slavery and the history of that in general because you could be attacked for telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, we've got a problem in the West, I think, with all of that. But
we certainly do.
Yeah. But so one of the things we wanted to talk about today that people seem to not have an understanding of is like when people talk about war, they talk about warfare, the actual fighting. Like the Cold War was a war, but there was no active fighting between Russia and the United States, I believe. I mean, I guess you could talk about like the proxy wars and stuff, but that wasn't direct.
Mm-hmm.
There's other portions of war beyond just like the combat. And one of the big ones is propaganda. And I think we're seeing that in real time today.
Yeah.
So propaganda is extremely important in war, and you would know more about that than me. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. The fundamental thing to remember is that, as Karl von Clausewitz said, war is a continuation of politics by other means. So the fighting is only a means to achieve a political outcome. That's all it is. It's not an end in of itself. If you win a battle, that victory is only as good as what you do with the victory afterwards. And that's where the propaganda comes in. Because if you can undermine your enemy's support, both sort of internally and externally, by portraying events in a certain way, by lying in a certain way, or even, selective truths, that sort of thing, then you can strongly affect the outcome, even if you're militarily weak. And that's why non-Western actors, countries, groups rely heavily on propaganda to achieve their aims. And yet many Western nations, I'd say almost all of them, to this day have very little or no understanding of propaganda or narratives, hearts and minds, that sort of thing. And it's one of the reasons we sort of constantly end up in the difficulties that we're in.
So there's some interesting stuff there. So, okay. I mean, the most obvious form of propaganda that I can see right now is like the oppressed versus oppressor narrative, which I think stems from Marxism.
Yeah.
And that's just being applied everywhere. And I think one of the
Mhm.
problems, especially, we've just really had a problem with like race relations in the United States in the past, like I would argue since Obama. And everything now we apply the US standard of race relations to any other situation in the world.
Yeah.
And in that frame, oppressed versus oppressor, whatever the oppressed does is not wrong, and whatever the oppressor does pretty much is wrong. And I think when you look at like the Middle East today, or if you look at the throughout the Ottoman Empire and prior, all groups kind of had racism against each other. There wasn't.
That's the story of humanity, is that everyone had an in-group, and for one reason or another, people decided not to like people who weren't in the in-group, the ones who were in the out-group. Racism or, sort of prejudice is applicable to absolutely everyone. The idea that this is just a Western phenomenon is totally ridiculous. And of course, power dynamics change all the time in history. And so one time, one group is the oppressor and the other is the oppressed, and then the world changes and the oppressed becomes the oppressor and the oppressor becomes the oppressed.
Yeah. And so now
I'll just add to that, sort of that's been European history versus sort of the non-European world for over 1,000 years now. So when just look at for example, sort of the various Islamic powers who attacked Europe in one way or another over the centuries, whether it's any example really. I mean, sort of like Algeria, for example, what was the territory of Algeria, were constant Barbary pirates were launching attacks all over the southern coast of Europe, kidnapping Europeans and enslaving them, and were a serious threat to Europe. And then they were part of the Ottoman Empire, vassals of a very powerful Turkish Empire. But then the balance of power shifts, the Turks decline, the Barbary states decline, and they become colonized by France, their previous target for many of their raids. So, perfect example of how, the balance of power shifts and, the attacker becomes the attacked.
Yeah. And we're just, I mean, there's a lot of places you can go with that.
Yeah, we could go on forever talking about how the shifts in various things.
For sure. But now they've rewritten that. I mean, the most fascinating thing to me is how they've rewritten history about surrounding the Crusades.
Yeah.
They think the Crusades were just Christians like trying to take territory in the name of Christendom. And I mean, Christianity spread as not militarily. If they're talking about a religion that spread militarily, Islam.
Absolutely. I mean, and also sort of Christianity in its early days, I say early days, we're talking a couple of centuries, was heavily, heavily persecuted. Christians were for a very long time the powerless before they were the powerful.
Right.
And, yeah, exactly. I mean, the Crusades, it's amazing how, people talk about the Crusades. No one can ever tell you about the Battle of Manzikert, which was a battle between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Turks, which led to the Turkish invasion of what's now Turkey, Anatolia, and the attacks on Christians that were taking place after that, which caused the Eastern Roman Emperor to go to the Pope and ask for assistance, and then the Pope was able to marshal the strength of Europe through the nobles to launch a crusade to try and retake the Holy Land, which had been Christian territory for hundreds of years before the Islamic conquests. All that context is completely, I wouldn't say ignored is maybe the wrong word, because that assumes people knew it. I don't think people even have any understanding of that.
People don't know. People don't know that Christianity was spread throughout Africa well before it spread.
Oh, yeah. Egypt was one of the most important centers of early Christianity, whilst much of Europe was still pagan territory. Eastern Europe, I'm pretty sure, was almost entirely pagan in the first few centuries when Egypt was at its most important for the religion. And even when it fell to the Arab conquests, I would say a lot of Europe was still pagan or recently Christian.
Yeah. Well, in Syria, that was a center of Christianity, Damascus.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of, if we want to use the term racist, that people just assume the entire Middle East is all Arab, mean, there's
Mhm.
always been all these different groups,
Yep.
and since it became Arabized, they
Yeah.
have the oppressor. But I don't know.
I would also mention Ethiopia was Christian very early on.
Hmm. One of the That's where the Ark of the Covenant is said to be, or
Well,
was.
yeah, one of the places it's said
Yeah.
to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot to go off of there. But
Yeah.
if we're going to go back to propaganda, like, can you talk about some examples of propaganda in other wars?
Yeah. So the propaganda dynamic particularly plays out when you have asymmetric warfare. So you have a conventional army against a guerrilla force or a non conventional force. And obviously, we're seeing that on display right now with Israel and Hamas. But the most famous example of it is America in the Vietnam War, and specifically the Tet Offensive. So the Tet Offensive was a major offensive in 1968, launched by the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong, especially the Viet Cong. And the plan was to sort of this would be the offensive that gets the Americans out of Vietnam, because they were hoping by attacking the South itself in Saigon, in the capital, and in the old capital of Hue, that they could undermine America's war efforts, prove that the South Vietnamese army was incapable of responding to any serious threats, and they were hoping to get many defections from the South Vietnamese army, as well as having much of the South rise up on their behalf and join them in their struggle. And they were hoping this would completely undermine America and send them packing. Now, the exact opposite happened in the north. Sorry, not in the north. They attacked an American base called Khe Sanh. It was a huge, huge battle, and so they attacked there as a diversion, whilst they attacked other major points in the south, including Hue and Saigon, like I mentioned. And everywhere they took heavy, heavy casualties and were militarily defeated. The South Vietnamese army performed far better than they expected. There was very, very few, if any, defections, certainly not en masse like they hoped, and they did not get the local support that they thought they would get. However, the way the offensive was reported by the American media completely changed everything. So there was the very famous incident of the American embassy in Saigon being attacked, where 19 Viet Cong attacked the American embassy. Now, what happened is the specific details are very significant, because at no point did any of the Viet Cong get inside the American embassy. The building was never breached. There was 3 Marines, and then there were various other people who were guarding it, and they were not overwhelmed. And the compound was entered, but the building itself at no point was entered. And the attack on the embassy started early in the morning, and it said that by noon the ambassador was back at his desk, and in the afternoon, the embassy was back open for business. So it was a complete failure militarily. However, the way the American press reported it, it seemed like a complete humiliation for America, in that this ragtag bunch of guerrillas had managed to gain access to the embassy. They said they were inside the embassy. They weren't. They said they were in the embassy. It's like, oh, what a humiliation this is. This is terrible. And even though militarily it was the whole thing, the whole offensive, both the embassy battle in Saigon and others, was a disaster for the Viet Cong, the American press portrayed it as a disaster for the United States, and this massively undermined public will to fight in America. And lots of people started to turn against the war. Now, there are reasons for this. I mean, the American political and military leadership had been overly optimistic in their assessments of how well America was doing. But very importantly, and there's a guy who was in Vietnam, who I believe his name was George MacArthur, I think his name was, American journalist, who said that the American press in Vietnam had come to really despise American authorities in Vietnam. So they were primed to hear bad news. So when the Tet Offensive happened, even though there was lots of good news to report because America had inflicted heavy casualties and repeatedly defeated its enemy, all they could do was report what a disaster had happened, even though it hadn't.
That's kind of an example of how the values we hold most dear in the West, like free and open press and freedom of speech, can kind of be used against us.
Oh, absolutely. And they know this. They know this, and the media has become a very important weapon of anti-Western groups or sort of anti-democratic groups, terrorist organizations like this. And public support for the Vietnam War, it's well known, did eventually disappear, and America pulled out, and you had the disaster of North Vietnam taking over South Vietnam, and the American helicopters taking off from the roof of the embassy because they were evacuating in such a desperate way. And these things have real consequences. So, I can't remember who said it, but, truth is the first casualty of war. And for some reason, it is very badly underestimated just how important that is by Western armies and Western leaders.
Well, and we're seeing this happen in real time now. We're seeing with like the Biden administration, I would argue it's different reasons than just trying to appeal to one segment of the people he needs to turn out in November. But the Biden administration is completely like, they can see how public opinion, especially with young people's turning. And by the way, young people don't vote, especially Gen Z. Yeah. So I don't know, but like it kind of creates this weird dichotomy that I believe might be the fall of the West, which is like where we are a lot, TikTok. It seems like all public opinion is all one way. And if you look at polls, it's different. And even broadly speaking, the polls that matter are likely voters. Likely voters overwhelmingly stand with Israel. It's like 80%. Yeah. So, but like when the vote doesn't align with what public opinion seems to be, that's when people think that there's something weird going on with the election. They don't think like, well, I didn't vote. All three of my siblings that are younger than me probably don't vote. Like, I would be shocked if my brother who's 26 voted in the 2016 election. He tells me he did. I don't believe that he did. And then both of my brothers, I don't think will vote this time because they live in Arizona. It's really hard to vote in Arizona. I don't think that they'll vote. That's a tangent, but like they see things so one way. And one of them was just saying to me, like, his algorithm is all conservative and pro-Israel on TikTok. Mm-hmm. While other people's algorithm is all anti-America, anti-Europe, anti-Israel. And when our elected officials are voting in line with what people actually believe, but not what it seems like people believe to them, I think that's when things get pretty violent, honestly.
Yeah, because one group feels opinions with them when in reality it's not.
Yeah, but like the whole point of a democracy is that we can have a peaceful transition of power. Mm-hmm. If you no longer believe that if you go out and vote, your vote will be in line with what the country actually wants, then you're going to lose faith in that system and you're going to find another system. And the people who have gotten violent on both sides. So yeah. We're already falling into this trap. And I think another thing, but like, we're too stupid to see that. We're too stupid to see. We have Western assumptions about media, for instance. The Western assumption that like all media is unbiased. Well, first of all media is biased. And we know that because like one side will say Fox News is the devil. The other side will say MSNBC is the devil. They're all biased. But then we look at like Al Jazeera and they can't fathom that they might be biased.
I know, and or if they do, some will admit. So if you point out Al Jazeera is biased, they'll say, "Oh well, the American press is also biased." It's like, oh God, is that really the same? Come on,
different.
One is the sort of tool of a brutal dictatorship. The other, you might not like it, but it is a free company in a free country. It's hardly the same.
Yeah, well, like Al Jazeera, they have a problem where they've had this problem for years, but we don't seem to widely report it, or I don't know, where they always happen to have reporters right at a place where Americans would be killed every single time. And we got on the Qataris about that because Qatar funds that whole thing, by the way, just like they fund the universities. They fund everything that seems to have very anti-Israel bias now, but they're the neutral third party negotiating for the hostages. But they used to always have reporters at a place where Americans would be killed in the Iraq War and stuff. Mm-hmm. And like the Bush administration gave them a hard time with that. And they were like, we're not going to use you anymore. We let them get away with that. And I don't quite understand why. But
yes, it really is a mystery. And Israel's also responsible for this because Al Jazeera are allowed to operate in Israel, even though Qatar doesn't recognize Israel. And even though Al Jazeera are clearly, you only have to look at their Arabic coverage. mean, their English coverage is bad enough, but their Arabic coverage to know just how pro-terrorist they are. And for some reason, they haven't been kicked out of Israel. Israel's well within their rights to kick out a channel which is, the tool of a effectively an enemy dictatorship, but they don't. It really is bizarre. I think it shows you just sort of the laziness of sort of Western leaders, in this case specifically Israeli leaders, that something that was so simple to do if you have enough of a backbone, but they won't do it.
Yeah. There was an Al Jazeera article that Melinda Strauss sent me like maybe a couple weeks ago. And it was the craziest thing. They were saying that they found a mass grave site that clearly was the fault of the Israelis, but never proved that Israelis were ever around.
Yeah.
It was in a school in the northernmost part of Gaza. But then all of the photos they were showing and all the journalists they were quoting were from Rafah. How did they get from Beit Lahia, which is at the very north, like right by Ashkelon, down to Rafah, which is on the border of Egypt? How did they get there? And like but people like just take that at face value as if it's reporting. Like that wouldn't pass any sort of standard test for journalism.
No, and also I'm fairly sure that sort of Russia Today and sort of the Iranian station Press TV have been restricted in what they can do because it's understood that these are propaganda arms of hostile countries. But for reasons I don't know, Al Jazeera have managed to avoid this fate. And of course, you're allowing effectively an enemy entity operate in your territory, exploiting your freedoms, whereas American press obviously can't do what they like and say what they like in Qatar in the same way that no one can, because Qatar is a dictatorship.
Well, yeah, and that's like probably the worst, but I don't know, they're really good at it. Like they're really smart with how they've done it. Like Al Jazeera is just interesting to report, or like to watch. Like it's like Vice. Like Vice is entertaining to watch, whereas other news just like isn't quite there. And it's really interesting that they've figured that out. I was talking to someone who was saying like, who's Jewish, and he watched some Al Jazeera, maybe, or Vice documentary about the tunnels underneath Gaza, like in 2014 or something. This came out, and he was like, I'm super pro-Israel and Jewish, and I came out of that documentary like they need those tunnels. Like those tunnels are not a big deal. And like the way that they're able to do that, I don't know. Ryan.
Well, I think the reason for that is that when you're not encumbered by the truth, the way the Western press at least aspires to be, clearly they do lie and they are biased in their own way, but they can't even the worst ones can't get away with what Al Jazeera gets away with. And so when you can sort of paint these stories, and bear in mind, and this is the untold story of this current war, Hamas will only give you access if you say the story that they want to hear, they want to be heard. So if Al Jazeera or Vice got access to the tunnels, it's because they knew they'd be portrayed positively. They wouldn't let a critic into the tunnels.
Yeah.
And so it gives you an advantage if you operate like that.
But then the idiots over here are saying like, well, everyone who's been down there came out liking them. So clearly if you've actually been there, you get it.
Yeah, and this is, by the way, it's a constant problem with dictatorships in that they limit access and they give access to those who are sympathetic, and then they show those who are sympathetic a watered down or completely fake version of what's going on. And then people will cite these reports. Like it's well known that China does this with foreign, not just journalists, but foreigners in general who visit. They'll take them to the same places, have them see the same things, and they come back and say what a great place China is, because they've just seen, it's called the Potemkin village, that sort of fake controlled environment. You may as well be in a giant TV studio, and that's what it is.
Yeah, and they've, Ryan was talking about how like the Russians, KGB, all came up with this with Arafat back in the 60s. Of like, we're just going to lean into this. And so they've had a 50-year head start. And the question I asked Ryan, and I guess I'll ask to you, is like, I wonder if Arafat and the Russians could see this coming 50 years down the line, or if they just picked something and stuck to it and it worked out for them. I don't know.
I think they were opportunistic. they were certainly opportunists in the way they operated. So I don't think they could have necessarily seen it coming, but I think they were able to, as time was going on and sort of like opinion was developing in the West and shifting in the West, particularly, especially as around the what you described before, the whole oppressor oppressed narrative, they were able to sort of step quite seamlessly into that paradigm. So yeah, I don't think they actually had the foresight to know that would happen, but it became a very effective weapon for them.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, one of the things that I think is like especially the US, because our political system is so different. Like, you guys
Mm-hmm.
have parliamentary, so you guys don't have to have regular elections. Like, you do, but it's not on a set timetable. And you guys' election season is way shorter. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can't campaign for 2 years prior to an election. We're in
Yeah,
a
we actually have got a bit more fixed timetables now. Yeah, it used to be until you had like terms of parliament and then the prime minister could call an election. But yeah, we don't have the whole midterm thing that America has. It's sort of you get your parliament and then that's it until the next election.
Yeah, because here, my argument is especially in the United States, we think so short term because we think in these 2 year blocks.
Hmm.
Whereas dictators who don't have to worry about an election, like Abbas is on year 17 or 18 of the 4 year term. Hamas is on year 17 or 18 of the 4 year term, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Because Arafat died in 04, I think, right? And then, I mean, Qatar, dictatorship, Iran, dictatorship, Russia, Putin's been in for what, 20 years? No.
Something like a bit more, 24 years, I
Yeah.
think.
I mean, these people have stuck around for a long time. They're thinking about
Mhm.
in 50 years from now. Whereas in America,
Yeah.
we're thinking, I mean, when stuff got really bad in the 70s, we were just thinking, well, the pendulum's going to swing in the next election. And we're not thinking about 50 years in the future.
Yeah, I think that's actually goes beyond the election system. I think that Westerners in general are very short-term thinkers compared to lots of non-Westerners. You know, it's well known in sort of many Oriental cultures. They are known for their long-term thinking, very much. And I think, you listen to some of the rhetoric of the Arabs fighting Israel. They will talk about the Crusades, for example, and they will say, it took us 200 years to kick out the Crusaders. We'll wait. If we can't beat you now, we'll beat you later. And whereas if you try to be like a long term thinker in the West, you come up with against a lot of resistance because people want results now. So if I ask for money for something, whether from the public or private sector, they want to see immediately what they can get out of this. Whereas if I say, actually, this is for you'll see the rewards in generations, people just don't really know what to do with that. And Israel's leaders, particularly, but also America, are particularly short term in their thinking. They do not think more than one step ahead, and you know, and it leads to disaster. There's just no long term planning for things if we're talking about wars and sort of strategy around wars and negotiations. Look at Ukraine now. I mean, like you mentioned, Russia has the advantage of being a dictatorship. I think that Biden didn't think. I don't know. I don't really know what he thought or what he was being advised militarily, but he's failed to make a very convincing case as to why America should be sort of supporting Ukraine, which I strongly believe they should be doing. But I think he just thought maybe he thought it would be self-evident, and now it's a divisive issue in America. It wasn't at first, but now it is.
Yeah, that's if we're talking about propaganda, that's another one of the biggest
Yeah.
things. And it's kind of a shame because I've seen on the right, like in America, the right has become sympathetic to Putin. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
sympathetic to Putin, but sympathetic to the Russian case and just like more sympathetic to American isolationism. And I think what people don't understand, and I was trying to explain this actually to my dad, because my dad was saying, like, well, I know Putin lied in that interview, but I don't understand why we're in Ukraine. And my dad's really smart. And I was like, we're fighting the short term war to avoid the long term war.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, that that's another thing. It's sort of it's again the lack of long-term thinking. Like explaining this as an upfront cost just doesn't seem to register with people because they can't see further than it. So if you explain that, funding Ukraine to prevent potentially like a direct conflict between America, NATO, and Russia is considerably cheaper than the direct confrontation, or alternatively, to degrade the Russian military as much as has been done. Obviously, they can rearm and resupply, but they've taken horrendous losses. Even we shouldn't be complacent, of course, and things are not looking great for Ukraine. But then we shouldn't forget that Russia's taken horrendous losses, and if America and the West, lots of European countries as well, the UK particularly at first gave a lot of very helpful equipment to Ukraine. If we had to spend that money, then I think that's a great thing.
I mean, the biggest thing is NATO. Like, are we going to go to World War III? Because, I mean, I think there have already been stray rockets or bombs or something that have landed in Poland.
But it was a Ukrainian one in the end. So
yeah.
The internet got all excited about World War III. The memes were already being created, but it was a Ukrainian rocket and not a Russian one. So no World War III just yet.
Yeah. But I mean, Ukraine was the buffer zone.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine falls, and really like the parts of Ukraine that Russia has right now, they keep those Ukraine falls because those are like the economic hubs, right?
Not just that, it's more that it shows that you can invade a country, and as long as you're patient, even if you suffer, eventually America and the West will get bored and you can succeed, and that will give other countries that want to invade others and seize territory or seize an advantage sort of effectively permission to do so, because they'll see as long as we can keep going and make sure it's a drawn out conflict, which is much easier for them because there'll be dictatorships or sort of non-state actors who are not accountable in the same way as democracies are, then no problem.
Yeah, and maybe they'll even get a lot of U.S. military equipment out of it, like they did in Afghanistan.
Yes, that's a separate one, isn't it?
That one I can't even talk about. It makes me so mad. So the last part of this is like occupation. When we're talking about propaganda, is like they talk about occupation constantly, as if being occupied in and of itself is like the worst thing that a person can be. I would say being under a dictatorship might be worse. I don't know. Occupation might stem off of that in certain ways. It's obviously not good to live under the rule of someone that you don't have power over, which is what an occupation is, but it's also what a dictatorship is. And like in Russian propaganda, but also, I mean, Russian propaganda, I believe, talked about Crimea as being occupied by Ukraine for a long time.
It wouldn't surprise me.
I don't quote me on that, but I believe that's true. And now we talk about occupation in Lebanon. That's constantly talked about, maybe just in my comments, because I've got a Lebanese Druze guy who likes to comment a lot on my stuff. West Bank constantly talked about as occupied. Gaza Strip constantly talked about as occupied. All of these groups we need to end the occupation, and they use this word in weird ways. So you can make arguments that parts of the West Bank are in fact occupied, but when they use the term occupied, they'll say that, but then they'll change it to mean just all of Israel existing as a whole is occupied.
Yeah, that's the point, and that's really the important thing to understand about the term occupation is that, and again, a lot of Israelis fall for this. It's not being used in the sort of a very narrow legal sense where in some places it's debatable. It's being used to describe the whole thing. The whole of Israel is an occupation to them. The whole thing is an illegitimate entity and something that they see as worthy of being destroyed because it's an occupying power. And you'll find that the people who accuse Israel of occupation or other Western countries of committing this have got no problem when non-Western countries occupy other places. So you will not see a lot of people in the West get upset about Turkey occupying northern Cyprus. They just don't care. Even though that's a clean-cut, sort of no dispute, sort of Cyprus was a sovereign nation invaded by Turkey, who created a breakaway republic in northern Cyprus. No way around it, pure occupation, but it's not convenient to them, so they don't bring it up. Or what Morocco's doing in Western Sahara, another Islamic country, widely considered an occupation, but it just doesn't have the same the same impact because of course these are sort of tools of convenience. It's very convenient to call Israel an occupier, but that same anger and passion just isn't there for the others.
Right. Yeah, I mean, present day, there's a lot of other occupations going on that
Mm-hmm.
we talk about. But then also, in like historically speaking, there have been other occupations.
Well, exactly. I mean, even just talking about sort of Israel, if you're a sort of Palestinian, when was Palestine not occupied? So before it was part of the British Empire, then part of the Ottoman Empire. Before that, the Mamluks, and then we could go on for a while just discussing the different empires that controlled the land. So where's the non-occupation, so to speak, if you're using this argument? It's
Right.
not there. Yeah, like you said, sort of history is full of this sort of thing.
Like they'll always say, like, of course they are going to become terrorists. They're occupied. Well,
Mm-hmm.
Japanese terrorists were not born out of the U.S. occupation of Japan.
Yeah.
And then if you look at like the occupation of Germany, that was split up among the four powers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Comparatively speaking, I think that's the best example you have of like, is occupation really that bad? Because Russian occupation was, because when the Berlin Wall fell, they all ran to the other side. But
Yeah.
being occupied by the other powers didn't seem to be quite so bad, right? I mean,
Yeah, and also they use occupation and sort of colonization interchangeably. And then you look at European empires, and the best example is Britain's final colony, which was Hong Kong. Was Hong Kong better off under British rule or Chinese rule? Virtually no one, other than like a communist in China or in the West, would claim it's better off under Chinese rule. And if there was a referendum tomorrow, should Hong Kong return to being a British colony or remain part of communist China? Everyone knows exactly how they would vote. They'd vote to become a colony again. So it's just used as this byword for evil, whereas it just doesn't take into account any of the circumstances. And by the way, there's plenty of other territories in the world which I think were better off as European colonies than what came after independence.
oh,
Hong Kong is not the only example, but for some reason, it's better that they control them. Well, I say they control themselves. It's normally a dictator that a sort of a local dictator oppresses the people rather than a European one who's less oppressive. Okay, maybe doesn't give so much local control, but still runs the place relatively benignly. But apparently, that's a great sin.
Well, and if you look at all of the British protectorates throughout the Middle East and then Hong Kong, all of those are doing way better than whatever France and the United States tried to put in place. I mean, like, I would argue, like, the Gulf states that, like, were founded as British protectorates during, like, all of that. I mean, I would argue that they were doing way better. Those are the only stable countries in the Middle East, really.
Yeah.
Are the benevolent dictators, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like the UAE particularly, the reason they are successful is because they managed to avoid the trap that a lot of other countries in the Middle East fell into, which is sort of these sort of constant civil wars and internal disputes and fighting. Because, it's called the United Arab Emirates because they split up control. So each emirate has its own control. They're not constantly butting each other's heads, and they've got some agreements, like they've got unified foreign policy and stuff like that. But for the most part, they stay out of each other's way and don't make sure there's not sort of internal clashes. But of course, look all over the Middle East: Lebanon, Syria, Libya, Yemen, God only knows where else. Algeria had a brutal civil war in the 90s as well. It's just and the violence, the inter-Iraqi violence is well known. Sunni, Shias, Kurds. It's a total mess.
So I think a way to wrap up would be like, historically, can you speak to any like ways that people have gotten around propaganda? Like, is it just media literacy? Because that's not going to happen in the West. I'm sorry.
It's a very difficult one because the propaganda can come in various ways, and the way you counter it varies as well. So if the press is dedicated to slandering you, you have to create very good responses to that. Now, America and Vietnam failed. Israel, for the most part, fails because the press is almost all sort of dedicated to making Israel look look incredibly bad, particularly the broadcast media in the English speaking world. You've got maybe 2 stations that are not like that's against Israel, and you have to sort of develop very, very effective tools to counter what, not just what your enemy's saying, but how the media is portraying it. And so far, that's not been done. Israel hasn't done that. It's failed on almost every count in the propaganda war. Good intelligence is very important, and because that allows you to sort of stay one step ahead with propaganda. So if you can uncover plots, uncover a terrorist organization's true nature, and release it to the public, then that's very important. But education is how you educate people, though, is hard to say, because you can't have a class in school. This is what X terrorist group believes, and this is why you shouldn't believe them. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But I think sort of self-confidence is incredibly important. So I think the reason a lot of Americans are receptive to anti-American propaganda, or Brits receptive to anti-British propaganda, is because they don't have the same pride in their country that they once did. And it's like if someone tells you a terrible story about your own family, your own mother or your own father, that family pride in you comes out, and you instinctively want to stand up to it, even if it's true. Even if it's true, you'll want to put the best case forward for them. So I think that's why sort of national pride is so important, because so many nefarious groups can undermine a country that doesn't have that self-confidence and belief.
So we got to build that back up. Well, who knows how that's going to happen. Well, thank you for doing this. I think we got some really good stuff. Everyone follow him. I'll have him linked below. Is there anything
Thank you very much. I think we've covered everything. It was great to be here.
Thank you. I'll stop recording.